Today on Family Talk.
When traumatic or terrible events happen in our lives, God rarely answers our questions of why they occur in the first place, but He does promise to console and comfort us as we walk through these tough times. Hello everyone, I'm Roger Marsh, and on this sobering edition of Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk, Dr. Dobson will sit down with 3 survivors of the shooting at First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs, Texas. For those who are not aware of the events on November 5th, 2017, a deeply disturbed man entered the small church with an AR-15, shooting and killing 26 people and wounding 24 others. Today you will hear from one of those wounded church members, whose name is David Colbath. David will share his story of being shot 8 times and how God has used him in the aftermath of this shooting. Also joining us for this broadcast are the head pastor of Sutherland Springs, Frank Pomeroy, and his wife, Sherry. They will talk about that horrific day from their perspective, including the loss of their adopted daughter, Annabelle, who was killed in the shooting. The Pomeroys will also unpack the encouragement they received from the survivors and the obligation they felt to continue to spread the gospel to the surrounding community. There's a lot of content to get to today, so here now is the first part of their conversation with Dr. James Dobson here on Family Talk.
Pastor, I'm going to start with you. You were not there the morning this shooting took place. Neither was Sherry.
That is correct. Very rarely would we miss a Sunday. However, I teach at youth camp, RA camp, in the summertime, and I was the line officer of the riflery to work with the young men and the girls when they would come by as well. The only certification class to be able to teach at camp was a Saturday-Sunday class that weekend. That was the only class that was offered before the camp in July. My chairman of the deacons at the time was the other man that worked on the riflery at camp with me. He said, I'll cover the pulpit, I'll cover the service today. You go and get that certification. And so that's why I was in Oklahoma City on the second day of training to get that endorsement to go out and do the qualifications.
How did the information come to you? Did you get a phone call?
Well, actually, we were sitting there about talking about the gun range we were about to go out to qualify, and I got a text from my videographer there at the church that said there's an active shooter. We are so small out in the middle of nowhere. Even though we had contingency plans, complacency, I suppose, had been predominant in my mind, so I texted him back and said, no, that's not funny. And he texted something back to the effect of, no, this is real. At that point, I informed everybody I got to go outside. I'm trying to use my phone. I couldn't get a hold of anyone. Turns out everyone now I was trying to get a hold of was in church that day. Now, our building and grounds guy never misses a Sunday. However, he was running late that morning. So I got a hold of him and said, what's going on? This is what I was told. He said, I'm only 10 minutes from the church. I'll let you know as soon as I get there. And when he got there, that's when he called me back and said, Frank, this is bad. And I asked about Annabelle, and he said she didn't make it.
Your adopted daughter.
That's right.
Sherry, let me ask you about that. Annabelle was killed, so you lost your daughter. How did you get the word, and what was the impact of that?
I was in Florida. I had recently taken a job as a contractor through FEMA, and I was traveling with my job in Florida. And I got a call from Frank. Usually he'll say hey or hi, but he didn't. He started the conversation as soon as I said hello. He said, Sherry, listen to me. And the tone, I knew something was wrong. And he said, there's a shooter at our church. I don't know anything else. And I asked him about Annabelle. He said, I don't know. And he was trying to keep from me what he already knew because I was all alone in Florida.
So how long was it before you found out?
I think it was probably 30 minutes to an hour later. I was at the airport, and I got on the phone with him again, and I said, just tell me. And he had told me in a previous conversation that Annabelle had been hit, but we didn't know if she was okay. He was just trying to break it to me gently because I was all alone. And finally, at the airport, at the security checkpoint, he told me that we lost Annabelle.
How many years had you been the adopted mother of Annabelle?
We had them 12 years.
And by 12, she had a twin sister?
No, she had an older sister.
Older sister.
Yes.
Who was not injured.
Correct. Annabelle was the only child we had there that day.
Yeah.
She was the baby of the family.
How old was Annabelle?
Annabelle was 14. She was special needs, but she was flourishing. She loved animals. She was learning sign language. She had a little friend in school that was blind, and she had a heart for helping people less fortunate.
And she is walking the streets of gold today.
She is. She would not have been able to cope with losing so many family members, because every one of those that perished that day were special to her. She wouldn't have been able to cope with that in her mind. So I think God took her with all of those that loved her. She loved them fiercely, and they loved her as well.
Did she die suddenly?
I hope so.
You don't know.
We don't.
The only thing I can say I know about that part is I asked the Lord one time why this group, Annabelle and those that were there, why the core of our church, the strength, all 26 of those that are gone were those I didn't have to worry about their salvation. They were saved. So when you say, did she go quickly? I don't know. However, I know that she knew the Lord and those others did as well, and I feel as though that God had a peace, whether quick or slow.
He carried her.
That was my worst fear after this, that Annabelle was scared. What did she do in her last moments? I had a new friend tell me on one of our hospital visits this story, and this has given me hope. It's a picturesque story that I haven't forgotten and I cling to. My friend Christy told me, she said, I don't know why I feel like I need to tell you this, but when I was a little girl, my daddy and I were at the beach, and he had a near drowning. And I saw him turn gray. I saw him going into convulsions. I saw him in a lot of pain. But then when we talked about this years later, my daddy told me, I didn't feel any pain. You say I was convulsing. All I felt was perfect peace. So from that, God was telling me through her story that those victims there, and I have to believe this with all I am, those victims there, even though we may have seen them, if we could put our eyes in that church at that time, they may have seemed like they were in pain, like Christy's daddy. She could see him convulsing, but he felt no pain. I have to believe God's hand was over those victims, and all they felt was his perfect peace.
26 people were murdered that day, and
24 more were injured.
24. So 50 people were shot that day.
That was a light number because unfortunately, or fortunately in this case, a lot of people skipped out of church because they knew the pastor and the wife were not going to be there that day. So we had a very light attendance. We normally ran about 100, and that day there was only 50 people in attendance, which saved a lot of lives.
How long did it take you to get home?
It took me about 10 hours to get home from Florida. From the time I heard the news until I landed in San Antonio.
You still didn't know who was dead, who was alive?
I found out in between flights that my best friends were gone. The news was coming out so fast on social media and the newscasts and everything. He was trying to get me to hear that from him before I heard it on the news.
Yeah, and that's where I heard it. I saw it on television, as did millions and millions of people. Pastor, what does it do to your heart as the leader of that flock to know that you have members who are wounded and others who are already dead all over that church and not knowing the details?
I am able to compartmentalize and focus on the task at hand. Therefore, my task at hand was getting from Oklahoma City to San Antonio, getting her off the airplane and getting to my children, my rest of my children and grandchildren. And therefore, my mind was focused in such a poignant way, I can't really remember what the emotions or feelings were that day. The
You were
following
in shock, aren't you?
Correct. It's all a haze. In fact, I've told folks it's really the first couple of weeks before the haze actually kind of dissipates enough for you to be able to really start analytically comprehending everything. Brother Mark, who is a pastor of a church in Yorktown, he had come down and kind of took over the reins to lead the logistics of what was going on for me. And I told Mark, I said, Mark, 26 folks are gone. I have all these folks in the hospital. The church is all shot up. Annabelle's gone. I have all this. I said, I'm done. I said, I'm not turning my back on God. I'm not saying that God doesn't exist, but my spirit level, everything I am is just almost empty right now.
Retching.
Yes, and I said to Mark, but I need to get to the hospitals. I was working with the FBI, the Texas Rangers. We had to help identify one of the folks that was gone. And I told Mark, I got to get to the hospitals to see my people, see the flock. And here I was thinking, I'm done. What are we going to do? The church is shot up. Everybody's shot up. Everything. In my mind, I was just flustered and said, God, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what you want me to do. But I went to those hospitals, and one by one, those that could speak or see me, and I stepped outside with Mark, and I said, we have a remnant. God is still working, because everyone I saw testified, I can't wait to get out of here and share what God is doing in our lives, and that I was able to be persecuted for the Lord. How blessed am I? I heard that repetitively from each one of the survivors, so that when I went to try to encourage them, God used them to encourage me that he was still on the throne, and that though I didn't understand how or what was going to come together, he was still working through all of them.
And that only happens in a Christian context.
Amen.
How could you
There was no hate.
face death and your body is shot up and you can be praising the Lord?
That's right.
That explains that there's something going on inside.
Hallelujah.
In a relationship with Christ. Okay, David Colbeth, you were there on that morning. You're not related to these folks. You were a member of the church, and you were shot 8 times.
Right.
Where?
Both ankles, my right calf, my buttocks 3 times, my back twice, and my right arm.
And how many surgeries have you been through?
Well, after the initial 3 weeks, I think I went through 5 different surgeries. I was very fortunate that I was shot and the bullets didn't do what they were intended to do.
I see the scars on your arms. You were hit hard, weren't you?
Shot on the backside of my arm here. The first round I took was right there, and it was early in the shooting.
Are you in pain right now?
Yeah, my arm hurts, ankle hurts, and my butt hurts, but I'm doing good. I'm doing great. I'm blessed.
What was your reaction to being sprayed?
As I've talked to other people now, we thought it was firecrackers going off. I stood up. I was in the back pew on the middle aisle, up against the aisle. And when the round started coming through the back door, which was only like 10 feet away, I turned around and screamed at everybody to get on the floor. I was screaming, get on the floor. But as I turned around, I caught my first round in the arm, and it blew this part of my arm out. It threw me down. And I crawled up to the front left of the church where our associate pastor was at, and we both kind of got hung up right there. But when he did come in, he fired until he was empty again. He walked out, got more ammunition, and came in, and that's when he was individually targeting people. And when he came to me, he fired at the man next to me, killed him. I was face down now, and I had a big pool of blood. I think the big pool of blood might have saved me, because he put that gun on the back of my neck, just 2 inches below my back line, and squeezed one off. And even though the bullet hole looks like it hit my vertebrae, it didn't. It bounced over the top of my heart and just barely missed my heart, bounced off a rib, and it's still in me in my side right now. And that should have killed me. I should have bled out, and I didn't. But he took care of a couple more guys and went outside and met his maker out there.
I pick up after the event. where I would come in is when the survivors told me that once he was gone, there was a literal peace that was tangible in the building. And I've had survivors tell me that even though there was pain and such, that there was a literal, tangible presence of God they could feel in that building right then. And I would submit to you, Dr. Dobson, that prior to this shooting, we were a very spirit-filled church anyway. We were not very well blessed with finances and such as that, but the spirit, such as through the food pantry, through many different events, God just really blessed the community through us. And it was God gets the glory, but the spirit was there, and I feel as though that's why Satan attacked so mightily there, to shut the spirit down. And even to this day, when people come and visit, or they usually stay because they're expressing this to me. There is something different here. There is a spirit of oneness, of peace, of mercy, and of family here.
Frank, tell us what happened the rest of that day. Here he is firing in all directions, 50 people shot. What happened to him?
He primarily shot through the walls. That's what incapacitated everyone. Then he went inside and took care of the rest of his business, thinking he was shooting everyone. He didn't want to leave anyone alive inside the church.
He was trying to kill the whole congregation.
The entire congregation.
How many people were there?
50 people there.
Well, that's nearly everybody.
That's right. He was shooting everyone he could. And he ran outside. One young man got away. One young man ran out, and he shot after him and ran outside. By the time he ran outside, a neighbor, Mr. Williford, had already been hearing the gunfire. He didn't attend our church at the time, but he attended elsewhere. He attends at our church now. His daughter had driven down, saw what was going on, backed up to the house real quickly and told her dad what was happening. He ran and got his long rifle and his ammo and ran outside, no shoes or anything to engage with the shooter.
Let me see if I get this straight. He's running down the road after the murderer, who is armed and has already showed a willingness to kill indiscriminately, and yet he put his life on the line. And did he catch up with him?
Actually, not only did he address that situation, he ran up on the shooter. The shooter was shooting at him. And he says God obviously was spreading those rounds because the shooter was shooting at him while he was able to fire his firearm and landed 2 shots into the shooter. At that point, the shooter jumped in his car and ran. And there was a passerby. Mr. Williford said, that man just shot up the whole church. Let's give chase. And he just gets in this man's truck, and they chase him down, and he finally crashes into a field because of blood loss, and Stephen had hit him twice in the chest cavity. And out in the field at some point, the police officers say that he shot himself one more time out there to end his life after all was said and done.
What do we know about that young man?
To be quite honest with you, I don't know a lot about the shooter. I believe he was 26 years old. He was a young man with his second marriage, had children, and his wife's parents and grandparents attended our church, and he was coming to enact violence. People say he was against them. However, obviously it was more to it than just that, because he was shooting through all the walls and came in shooting throughout the church. So he used that as his catalyst, but he had more, as David said earlier, evil came into the church that day and wanted to take out the church.
He was obviously a very angry man.
Well, yes, he was angry with everything in life, I tend to believe. Now, I am speculating somewhat here at this point, but just from what I know, he had a lot of animosity towards the church. I had met this gentleman 2 or 3 times previously, and he would come up to the church with his wife when she would come to visit her parents. But he made sure it was known that he did not have any regard for the church, didn't have any regard for God's word. He had no regard for the scriptures. He thought it was all a farce and it was silly. And there was a hatred that you just felt from him whenever he did come on church property, those few times that I'd seen him prior to this instance.
Sherry, let's hear more of your perspective. You have now gotten home and beginning to realize that the scope of this tragedy and, of course, the loss of your own adopted daughter. What was going on with you?
Well, my plane didn't land until Sunday night around 9 or 10. So Frank and I spent the night in San Antonio with our other children and our family. And we got a couple hours of sleep, I guess, on the floor. There was probably 20 of us gathered at my oldest son's house. And we got up Monday morning in the same clothes we had headed out Sunday morning in. Hadn't had a shower, hadn't had anything else. We just got up and drove the 30 miles from San Antonio to Sutherland Springs for the first time early Monday morning. And when we got there, the enormity of the situation hit, because that was not our little rural church anymore. It was a command center for the FBI. It was surreal. It was surrounded by officers and strangers and media from everywhere. It was just not the same place. It was covered with police fencing and police taping. And the fact that so many of our friends and loved ones and family, our church was a family. It wasn't just strangers. We had been there for 14 years, and that was our family. And
you knew those people intimately, didn't you?
They were several of my best friends and children that grew up with my children. And we had known each other for 14 years and created a bond. We didn't just meet on Sundays. We met several times a week at church, several times a week beyond church. We were a family. And to realize that so many of those were gone that were instrumental in raising my children up in the church were gone. That was very hard to take, realizing that all of our friends and family were gone at once.
The woman that was pregnant and lost her baby, did she die too?
Yes, sir. That woman lost her unborn child. She lost her life. She lost 3 additional children. She lost a brother-in-law, a mother and father-in-law, and a niece.
Was that the Holcomb family I believe I read about?
Yes, sir. There were 10 in that family that
10,
were lost.
and how many of them? All 10 of those?
Were lost. And there are less than that left in that family clan.
I don't want to invade their privacy, but how are they doing? Can you tell us that?
They are doing incredible in their faith walk. They're hurting. They're definitely hurting, but they are my inspiration. I lost my daughter and my good friends. They lost 10 family members, and they're able to get up in the mornings. They're able to go on about what they need to do, and their cry, much like David's, is, I was spared for a reason.
Well, I'm going to have to interrupt here because there is so much you all have to say, and there's so many details to this tragedy, and in fact, so many things to learn from it. And I appreciate you all being here, but I want to hear the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. So stay with us. You've flown out here to be with us. Stay with us. We'll continue talking, and we'll let our listeners hear tomorrow what we're about to record. Will you do that?
Amen.
Yes, sir. Thank you very
all
much
for
Thank
being
you.
with us. You all love the Lord. It is very clear, and you're letting the Lord use tragedy, and that's very difficult to do. We're going to hear more about it next time.
What incredible men and women of faith who have truly walked through intense trauma We ask all of our listeners to continue to pray for the Pomeroys, for David Colbath, and all of the other members at First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs, Texas, who were impacted by this tragedy. If you'd like to write them a letter or you feel compelled to support them financially, you can visit our broadcast page at drjamesdobson.org and find all the information you need. That's drjamesdobson.org, and then click onto the Broadcast tab. Be sure to join us again tomorrow to hear more from Pastor Frank and Sherry Pomeroy and David Colbath right here on Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk. I'm Roger Marsh. Thanks for listening.
Family Talk is not associated with Focus on the Family.
Hi, Dr. Tim Clinton for Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk. Hey, right now, grab your cell phone, go to your app store, and click on the Dr. James Dobson Family Talk app. Download it right now, and you can start listening anywhere at any time. 24/7, 365.